Welcome to Chapter 4 of the Olivoc Python course. In this lesson, we will learn about functions, how to define them with def, how to pass information using parameters, and how to return results. Let's get started.
So far, we have written code in one long block. If we want to calculate an average again, we copy-paste the same code and change the numbers. This quickly becomes hard to read and maintain. Functions solve this problem. We write the code once inside a function and then call it whenever we need it. If we want to change the logic, we change it in one place. This is a fundamental principle of good programming.
In Python, we define a function with the keyword def. The syntax is def, followed by the function name, parentheses, and a colon. The body of the function is indented. To run the function, we call it by writing its name followed by parentheses. In this example, we define say hello and then call it twice. Each call prints the message once. The important parts are def to start the definition, parentheses even if there is no input, a colon, and indented code inside.
A parameter is a variable inside the parentheses of the function definition. When we call the function, we give it an argument, which is the actual value. In this example, name is a parameter and Sarah is an argument. When we call greet Sarah, the parameter name gets the value Sarah. We can also create a function like square that takes a number and calculates its square. We call it with different values and get different results each time.
Functions can have multiple parameters. Here, print full name takes two parameters, first name and last name. We can also mix different data types. The print student function takes a string, an integer, and a Boolean. When we call it with Claudia, 23, and true, each parameter receives its corresponding value. The order of arguments must match the order of parameters. So far, our functions only print, but sometimes we want a function to calculate something and send the result back. We use the keyword return for this. The return statement ends the function and sends a value back to the caller. In this example, add takes two numbers, calculates their sum, and returns the result. When we call add 3, 5, the value 8 comes back and is stored in X. We can also use the returned value directly in expressions. Here are more return examples. The average of 3 function takes 3 scores, adds them up, divides by 3, and returns the average. We can also use if, elif, and else inside a function and return different values. The classify score function checks the score and returns a letter grade. When we call it with 72, it checks each condition and returns C. Notice that return immediately exits the function, so only one return runs. Functions work perfectly with lists and loops. The SumList function takes a list of numbers, loops through each one, adding to a total, and returns the sum. The average list function does the same, but also divides by the length of the list. We can now call these functions with any list of numbers. This is the power of functions. Write the logic once and reuse it with different data.
Here is a function that combines loops and conditions. CountPass takes a list of scores and counts how many are 18 or above. We start with count equals 0. For each score, if it is greater than or equal to 18, we increase count by 1. Finally, we return the count. With the scores 12, 18, 25, 10, and 30, 3 students passed. 18, 25, and 30. We can also use input inside functions. The readAge function asks the user for their age, converts it to an integer, and returns it. The BMI calculator takes weight and height as parameters and returns the body mass index.
We get the values from the user with input and float, then pass them to the function. This separates the calculation logic from the input logic, making the code cleaner and more reusable.
When writing a larger program, it is good practice to split the work into small helper functions. Each function should do one clear task. For example, a grade report program could have read scores to get data from the user, average list to compute the average, count pass to count how many passed, and print report to display the final message. This style makes the code easier to test, easier to understand, and easier to reuse in other programs.
Let's recap Chapter 4. We use def to define a function and call it by name with parentheses. Parameters are variables that receive input, and arguments are the actual values we pass in. The return keyword sends a value back to the caller. We can combine functions with lists, loops, and conditions to write clean, reusable, and organized code. Great job completing Chapter 4. In the next and final chapter, we will build a complete project using everything we have learned. See you there.